Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Very well. Angus Robertson raised an interesting issue with this letter from the First Ministers of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland on not having the referendum in June. And it was interesting that the leader of the Welsh government, Labour leader, signed that too.
Indeed it was. Just to recap, as we've discussed before, the government's pretty determined to have this vote for everybody around the country on the 23rd of June. Of course, there are important local and national elections in Scotland, Wales and around the country in May. The leaders now, the First Ministers, including Labour's Carwyn Jones in Wales, have signed this joint letter expressing real concern that those elections will cut across each other, it will get messy. Significant that Carwyn Jones is involved, because only if the Labour front bench decide to join in with the opposition to that date do they have a real chance of actually delaying it. Now, I understand that actually Jeremy Corbyn was not consulted by Carwyn Jones before he sent off this letter, and all the signs from the Labour front bench in Westminster are that they want the June referendum too. But that, today, the concern about the date has gone up a level. If you're getting First Ministers involved, some of the most senior politicians in the country getting together, Martin McGuinness, Arlene Foster, Nicola Sturgeon and Carwyn Jones, that is a significant level of opposition. No sign there from the Prime Minister that he's going to budge. I think Number 10's view on this is pretty set.
What's your view?
I want to get on with it. I think in its long-term instability and uncertainty about whether we're staying in the European Union is not in the interests of our economy, and we should get on with it. I'll be out door knocking for the Welsh elections on Friday and on Saturday morning, and I want to make sure that we retain control of the Welsh Assembly, but I also want to make sure that we stay in the European Union, because I think that's in the interests of my constituents in terms of jobs and the long-term future of the country.
If that remains...
Interesting, sorry, Kezia Dugdale hasn't signed up to that, and I think she in Scotland would be arguing that we should get on with this.
If the deal's done, there's no point in hanging around, and people are perfectly capable of differentiating between two issues. I mean, the SNP consistently voted against us having a referendum, so I'm not surprised they're trying to put other spanners in the works, but we need to get on with it.
It was right to say that it shouldn't be on the same day, and that was a battle, because originally I think the Prime Minister wanted to have it on the same day, and we were opposed to that. But honestly, it's 6 weeks, I'm sure, and frankly, I think there may become a point, I hate to break this to you, when voters may get a little bit bored about talking about the European Union.
If, of course, they're really paying very much attention so far.
What a scandalous comment. I'm sure, Laura, you'll keep...
It's difficult to tell. It's difficult to tell, isn't it?
If that is the official Labour policy, if that holds that they will vote to get the referendum out of the way by the end of June, then the Commons can't stop it, because I think it would have taken Labour, the SNP, and my speaking to the SNP, they are up for a fight, and the First Minister said she doesn't want June, and a group of Tory Eurosceptics.
No, you're wrong.
Eurosceptics to peel across over the edge.
But you're wrong about the process, because the process is a statutory instrument which is unamendable for the date of the referendum. So it's only the government that gets to decide.
I'm sorry, could you say that again? Because you said I was wrong.
Really difficult.
Could you say that?
You've often told me that I'm wrong, Andrew, and I managed to get over it.
That's because you often are.
But I managed
the man
to get
who thought Croatia was in the EU.
I just want to bet.
Could you just repeat that again?
Parliament has to...
No, hold on.
The point is, it's a statutory instrument that will be laid to set the date of the referendum. That is unamendable. It's only the government that gets to decide.
Yes, but they could vote against the statutory instrument.
And then we don't have a referendum.
No, then the government would have to come back to meet its manifesto commitment.
Chris is absolutely right. This is a statutory instrument that has to go through the House of Lords, as did tax credits. But in reality, de facto, if the Labour front bench and the Scot Nats and some Tory Eurosceptics were peeled into becoming their group, they could make a lot of mess over the timing, and they could derail it if they wanted.
It's unamendable, Andrew. I accept your apology.
You must be mishearing. The day I apologise to you, hell will freeze over.
You don't believe in hell.
While we've been speaking, the PM's been addressing MPs on Europe. Let's just have a listen to what he's been saying.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on progress with our renegotiation. The House has now had the chance to study the documents published by the European Council yesterday I believe this is an important milestone in the process of reform, renegotiation and referendum that we set out in our manifesto and which this government is delivering. We've now legislated for that referendum and we are holding that renegotiation. So let me set out the problems that we are trying to fix and the progress that we have made. First, we don't want to have our country bound up in an ever closer political union in Europe. We are a proud and independent nation with proud, independent, democratic institutions that has served us well over the centuries. For us, Europe is about working together to advance our shared prosperity and our shared security. It's not about being sucked into some kind of European superstate, not now, not ever. Mr. Speaker, the draft text set out in full the special status according to the UK and clearly carves us out of further political integration. And they actually go further to make clear that EU countries don't even have to aim for a common destination. This is a formal recognition of the flexible Europe that Britain has long been arguing for. In keeping Britain out of ever closer union, I also wanted to strengthen the role of this House and all national parliaments. So we now have a proposal in the text that if Brussels comes up with legislation we don't want, we can get together with other parliaments and block it with a red card. And we've also proposed a new mechanism to finally enforce the principle of subsidiarity, the principle dear to this House, which states that as far as possible, powers should sit here in this Parliament, not in Brussels. So every year the European Union has got to go through the powers they exercise and work out which are no longer needed and should be returned to nation states. Now, second, I said we wanted to make Europe more competitive and deal with the rulemaking and the bureaucracy that can cost jobs here in Britain and indeed across the European Union. We asked for commitments on all the areas central to European competitiveness. We want international trade deals signed, the single market completed, and regulation stripped back. All of these things are covered in the draft texts. There is a new proposal for specific targets to reduce the burdens on business in key sectors. This will particularly help small and medium-sized businesses. And there is a new mechanism to drive these targets through and cut the level of red tape year on year. Third, we are absolutely clear that Britain is going to keep the pound, in my view, forever. But we need to be just as clear that we can keep the pound in a European Union that will be fair to our currency. Put simply, the EU must not become a euro-only club. If it does, it would not be a club for us.
So that's the start of the Prime Minister's statement. We're told it's quite a long statement and then there'll be lots of questions. It's going to go on for quite a while, we understand.
Well, indeed. And in a sense, Andrew, this afternoon is when we'll get a first taste of the real juice of how difficult it's going to be for David Cameron internally inside his own party.
Because the interesting thing will be the questions from his own side.
Yeah. Precisely.
And how many are hostile.
Precisely.
Well,
not the front bench, of course, because they won't be speaking in this debate.
Well, you can follow all that on BBC Parliament.
And I think that's the kind of interesting thing that in a sense, this next fortnight is going to be about the battles within the Conservative Party. And then I think it's going to move to a state where really it is about, all right, we know what the package is, we know what the deal is, are we in or are we out? And I think that that's when the country will increasingly move towards saying, look, we all know there are things we'd like to reform about the European Union, but in the end, how can we tackle international crime, terrorism, the environment, climate change, unless we're part of the European Union?
So you think it'll be taken on a broad issue of principle rather than the details of the settlement?
I would guess.
Well,
Can I just ask, did I take you to be saying earlier on that the draft settlement that's been published, that the final settlement could actually be tougher in terms of the Prime Minister, that he can actually toughen it up between now and the eventual summit? Was that what you were saying?
The draft settlement isn't final. I mean, yesterday the Prime Minister was clear that he thinks what's there are good terms, although not every bit of it is actually defined.
So that's the British government's position. Were you trying to tell me earlier that he aims to toughen it up?
I would suggest to you that it's still not resolved. There are certain key issues, and one of those is benefits. So that's still got these X and Y in boxes and other elements. But the Prime Minister has been very clear. It's still an ongoing negotiation. But he hopes to have it achieved by the end of the February Council. But if he doesn't get all that he wants, that he believes is suitable, he will keep it going.
It's my understanding that this is as good as it gets for the British government, and that if there are any changes to this draft settlement, it will be to water down what has been proposed.
I think that's the private assumption, Andrew. But I do also think we shouldn't underestimate actually how much of this, in a sense, is still left to do. I was talking to a senior minister about this yesterday who said, look, just days ago, we couldn't get even the very notion of anything like a ban or limits on benefit for 4 years anywhere near any piece of paper. So for them, just really in the last couple of days, to get to the point where there's something black and white that says, yes, OK, the UK will be able to phase in and limit benefits to EU workers in this country, they regard that as a real achievement. Now, you're right, the private assumption is that once those details are in, this is probably the best that they're going to get with this idea of a phasing in, a 2-year phase in, and then the sort of gradual
only for new migrants.
Only for new migrants. But I think that is the assumption, but we also shouldn't underestimate how much of the detail is still to be worked out. But the interesting thing is that although David Cameron did say yesterday this was a draft, and since then ministers have been emphasising that to deal with the problems of it, the presentation of it, the factory visit, the big speech, it wasn't like a draft anything. It was like day one of an election
So does
campaign.
that kill the notion, though, Laura, that it was already agreed? I mean, that was the claim from lots of Eurosceptics, that it was done.
Oh, there was a
they
conspiracy.
knew that
There
there were
was a
these
secret
issues.
deal all along.
Let me hear from Chris Bryant.
My experience of having been Europe Minister is that it's not until you actually get to the final meeting and everybody's sitting around the table and you either, slam your hand on the table and say, I'm sorry, I want a bit more, or, that the final deal is done. But to be honest, I don't think voters in the end in this country will be making the judgment on that. There's a lot of stuff where salvation is in our own hands. We should and could be saying now to British companies recruiting only in Polish, only in Poland, for jobs that will only be done in England or in the UK, you cannot do that. I personally think that contravenes EU law, and it should be contravening UK law. There are things that we can do about scrutinising EU legislation far better. The European Scrutiny Committee has been asking for 2 years for a debate in the Commons on the Freedom of Movement Directive, and the government still won't allow it.
We go to bed reading the European Scrutiny Committee's report.
Not you and I.
I do.
But Andrew, it's a very dry
I meant
text.
we in the larger sense. I would never say we, meaning you and me. That's for sure. Laura, thank you very much.
But that was an interesting thought to end on, Andrew.
I've put it out of my mind already.
Thank you for that.
Just for the avoidance of doubt.
There was no doubt.
Phew.